Hello, I'm Bakhtiar Sanoy and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump to meet on Wednesday in Washington to discuss negotiations with Iran. United States aims to end Russia-Ukraine conflict by June, Zelensky says. And Japan votes in snap election as Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi seeks strong mandate. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will travel to Washington, D.C. next week for talks with U.S. President Donald Trump focused on Iran, his office said. The meeting is scheduled for Wednesday and comes as the United States and Iran held 2 rounds of indirect talks in Oman on Friday. Netanyahu's office said any agreement must include limits on Iran's ballistic missile program and an end to Tehran's support for regional armed groups. The White House hasn't commented on the meeting yet.
So weak. I appreciate you saying that.
Indirect talks between the United States and Iran in Oman have been described as a good start, with both sides agreeing to continue negotiations on nuclear issues amid cautious optimism from Washington and Tehran.
The United States and Iran resumed indirect talks on Friday in Oman, months after last year's US strikes on Iran's main nuclear facilities halted direct engagement. The US delegation was led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, while Iran was represented by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Oman's foreign minister said the talks helped clarify positions and identify possible areas for progress. Araghchi described the discussions as a good start, while noting that deep distrust remains a major challenge.
I think our negotiation with the U.S. delegation was, in fact, done in a good atmosphere. We were able to exchange our viewpoints, to express our concerns and our interests for a possible deal between the two sides on our nuclear question. I think it was a good start, a good beginning, and now we have to go back to our capitals and discuss, the question with our superiors and explain what happened during these negotiations, and we will decide for the next round, inshallah.
Trump has reiterated Washington's position on Iran's nuclear program as indirect talks between the two sides continue and expectations of renewed diplomacy remain cautious.
One thing right up front, no nuclear weapons. If we could have made that deal 2 years ago, we would have made that deal, but they weren't willing to do that. Now they are willing to do it. So they're willing to do much more than they would have a year and a half ago, or even a year ago when don't forget, we've only been doing this for exactly 1 year. And we started with them a few months after the beginning of this term.
The United Nations and several Middle Eastern countries welcomed the talks, urging diplomacy to reduce tensions and prevent escalation. Iran said the Muscat talks focused only on the nuclear issue, insisting its program is peaceful and denying any pursuit of nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, reactions in Tehran have been cautiously positive, with some Iranians expressing optimism about diplomacy, but also clear limits on what they believe should be negotiated.
Public reaction in Tehran has been cautiously optimistic following indirect nuclear talks between Iran and the United States in Oman, with citizens voicing support for diplomacy but also clear limits.
I feel that with a dignified step back and some concessions that do not call Iran's entire nuclear program into question, it is possible to move forward with a plan that both spares the people from harm and takes a step towards peace and security in the region. At the same time, we must pursue diplomacy and negotiations while keeping our finger on the trigger, ready, God forbid, to defend our homeland if we are subjected to aggression.
Others say negotiations are in the interest of both sides, arguing that diplomacy is preferable to the risk of military confrontation.
Countries like the United States and its allies want an agreement with Iran to avoid a military phase, because Iran is also a military power. From this perspective, we are optimistic about the negotiations.
But there is little appetite among the public for talks that go beyond Iran's nuclear program.
Our politicians have said clearly that talks should only focus on the nuclear program and not our defensive capabilities. Our defensive power acts as a deterrent. Within that nuclear framework, an agreement can be reached, and that is enough.
Iranian officials have echoed that position, insisting negotiations must remain limited to nuclear issues, even as Washington has pushed for broader discussions.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the United States wants the war with Russia to end by early summer and is likely to press both sides to meet that deadline. He said the timing may be linked to the U.S. election campaign and confirmed that Washington has proposed a new round of talks between the United States, Ukraine and Russia, possibly in Miami within a week, with Kiev agreeing to attend. Meanwhile, Russian forces launched another overnight attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, the second in less than a week, hitting power stations and power lines in the west and causing emergency power cuts nationwide. Ukraine has sought urgent help from Poland with staff and nuclear plants placed on alert as a precaution. Ukraine says at least one person has been killed after Russia launched hundreds of drones and missiles overnight, targeting energy infrastructure and residential areas across several regions.
At least one person has been killed in Ukraine's central Dnipropetrovsk region, and more than a dozen injured after Russia launched a major overnight air assault across several regions on Saturday. Ukraine's Air Force says more than 300 drones were fired, with most intercepted. In Zaporizhia, 8 people were injured and 18 apartment blocks damaged. The attacks focused heavily on energy facilities. Kyiv says electricity generation and distribution sites were targeted, forcing nuclear power plants to reduce output. One of the drone strikes damaged a logistics center east of the capital. As sirens sounded, residents once again took shelter underground.
When they grasp just a tiny bit of our reality, maybe just power cuts during freezing cold, maybe then they will understand how we survive here. They shouldn't get bombed, no. No Shaheds, nothing. Just this tiny bit, power cuts. Isn't it the most important to them? Gas and electricity? Maybe then they will understand.
They make us live in inhumane conditions, without heating, without electricity, to sleep in metro.
Ukraine also carried out strikes inside Russia. Officials say drones hit a missile fuel components plant in the Tver region, causing a large fire. An oil depot in Russia's Saratov region was also struck. Moscow says its air defenses downed dozens of Ukrainian drones, with power outages reported in Belgorod, but no casualties. Meanwhile, Russia claims its forces have captured the village of Chuhunivka in eastern Ukraine's Kharkiv region.
At least 3 people were killed when several avalanches struck northern Italy on Saturday, as rescue teams warned on the situation in the Alps remains unstable. 2 people died in Lombardy, while a skier was killed in Trentino after being buried off-piste on the Marmolada mountain. Earlier in the day, 2 ski tours were caught in the avalanche in the Aosta Valley, but were pulled free unharmed. France and Canada have both opened new consulates in Greenland's capital, Nuuk, underlying growing international attention on the Arctic island. France became the first European Union country to establish a consulate, fulfilling a pledge by President Emmanuel Macron. Canada also inaugurated its consulate on Friday, with officials saying the move reflects a long-term commitment to Arctic cooperation with Greenland and Denmark. The moves come amid rising tensions following renewed U.S. statements about Greenland's strategic importance. Japan is voting today in a snap general election that could strengthen Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's grip on power and shape the country's economic and security policies.
Japan votes a national election on Sunday after Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi dissolved parliament and called a snap vote. Opinion polls suggest her ruling coalition is on track for a strong victory. The vote will determine whether Takaichi's Liberal Democratic Party and its partners secure a stable majority in the 465-seat lower house, giving her a clearer mandate to govern. The campaign has been dominated by cost of living concerns. Takaichi's pledge to suspend an 8% sales tax on food has boosted voter support but unsettled financial markets, raising questions over Japan's already heavy public debt. Critics say the snap election leaves little time for debate and comes at a difficult moment, with record snowfall disrupting parts of the country and potentially affecting turnout.
There is no reason for to have the snap election this time around. We have to have the delays in the execution of the budget, and in the heavy snow regions, having election is very costly and makes a lot difficult for even ordinary people to go to the voting booths.
A decisive win could also affect Japan's foreign and security policy, including its increasingly tense relationship with China. Analysts say a strong mandate may make Takaichi more confident in pursuing defense reforms.
If Takaichi would win this election by landslide, she would assume the election gave her a mandate. So she probably becomes more confident in her stance on the security policy.
Turnout, particularly among younger voters, could influence the scale of Prime Minister Takaichi's expected win.
And now we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Pakistani authorities arrested 4 people on Saturday, a day after a suicide bomber killed at least 32 people at a mosque in Islamabad. Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi said the suspects, including the alleged mastermind, were detained. 1 counter-terrorism officer was killed and 3 others wounded during the operations. The attack, claimed by the Islamic State, targeted a mosque on the outskirts of the capital and injured over 170 people.
Immediately after the blast, raids were conducted in Peshawar and Nowshera, and 4 facilitators were arrested. The most important development is the mastermind, who belongs to Daesh, Islamic State, Afghanistan, has also been arrested. Our 1 ASI, Assistant Sub-Inspector from KPK Police, was killed during this raid last night. Some of our personnel were also wounded. However, the main mastermind, who belongs to Daesh, Islamic State, is in our custody.
Families of the victims gathered at hospitals in Islamabad after a suicide attack on a mosque killed dozens during Friday prayers, as world leaders and the United Nations condemned the violence and voiced support for Pakistan.
At Islamabad's largest public hospital, families waited through the night in packed corridors, searching for news of loved ones injured in one of the deadliest attacks the capital has seen in years.
They went inside the mosque to offer Friday prayers. The blast occurred and he is critically injured, and my nephew's son has been martyred. He is in the operating theatre.
Officials say the attacker opened fire at the mosque entrance before detonating explosives inside the Khadija Tul Kubra Imambarga compound on the outskirts of Islamabad. Survivors described hearing gunfire moments before the blast.
At first there was gunfire, 5, 6 fires, then there was a silence. After 15, 20 seconds there was an explosion. Chaos took place after the blast. People were running here and there. I did not feel I was hit because my back became numb. I came to know later that my back was hit as I came out.
The Islamic State group later claimed responsibility for the attack, which targeted Pakistan's Shiite minority. Sectarian violence has repeatedly hit the community in the past. The attack has been widely condemned by world leaders. The United Nations, Russia, China, Turkey, Iran and several European countries denounced the attack and expressed solidarity with Pakistan. Canada and Australia offered condolences, while the United States said Pakistanis should be able to practice their faith without fear and reaffirmed its commitment to the country's stability and security. Many leaders reaffirmed support for Pakistan's fight against terrorism and stressed the need for international cooperation to bring those responsible to justice.
Greek Prime Minister will visit Turkey on February 11th at the invitation of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He will take part in the 6th meeting of the High-Level Cooperation Council between the two countries. Turkish officials say discussions will focus on expanding cooperation and reviewing bilateral relations. High-level talks in Ankara brought Turkey and the European Union back to the table to discuss the future direction of their long-standing relationship. Turkish officials said the focus was in fair enlargement, renewed momentum on EU accession, and progress on modernizing the customs union. Our correspondent Adam Morrow has more.
On Friday, EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos, along with an accompanying delegation, arrived in Turkey for a 2-day visit for talks with senior Turkish officials. Upon her arrival in Ankara, where she was welcomed by Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, Kos and her delegation met with Vice President Cevdet Yilmaz, as well as Turkey's Trade Minister and Deputy Foreign Minister. After the meeting, Yilmaz said the talks had focused on the strategic nature of Turkey-EU relations, the importance of a fair EU enlargement policy, and the need for tangible progress in bilateral ties. He said concrete steps on Turkey's EU accession process and the modernization of the EU-Turkey customs union were of vital importance for relations between the two sides, adding that ties should not be confined to what he described as narrow issues. The Turkey-EU customs union, which entered into force in 1995, is currently limited to industrial goods and processed agricultural products. Ankara has repeatedly called for the resumption of talks to update the customs union, but concrete steps have yet to be taken. Turkey was first granted EU candidate status in 1999. However, accession talks have stalled in recent years over concerns related to human rights and alleged democratic backsliding. Last November, Ankara criticized a European Commission report on Turkey, describing it as biased and rejecting claims about the country's human rights record. After Friday's meetings in Ankara, Vice President Yilmaz said Turkey-EU cooperation should be based on equality, merit, and inclusiveness, as well as mutual interest and shared responsibility. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
A call for public debates on Georgia's European Union integration is stirring renewed discussion in the political space. The initiative comes from United Neutral Georgia, a party formerly outside the ruling coalition, who is questioning whether EU integration serves Georgia's national interests. The proposal has prompted a response from Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze, who says any discussion is possible, but the constitutional framework remains unchanged.
A call for public debates on Georgia's European Union integration has triggered controversy, not only over its content, but over how freedom of speech and public opinion are being interpreted in the political process. The initiative was put forward by United Neutral Georgia, which called on television broadcasters to organize debates questioning whether the EU integration still serves Georgia's national interests. In its statement, the party claims that society has grown skeptical of the European path and argues that the issue should be openly reconsidered. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze responded by welcoming the idea of debates, stating that discussion on any topic is acceptable and framing the initiative as an expression of freedom of speech. At the same time, he emphasized that Georgia's constitution defines EU membership as the strategic goal. The government's openness to debate comes amid a contrasting recent record. Over the past 2 years, pro-European demonstrations, civil society campaigns, and critical media voices have frequently been dismissed by ruling party representatives as destabilizing, foreign-influenced, or politically motivated. European institutions have repeatedly raised concerns over restrictions on media freedom, pressure on NGOs, and narrowing space for dissent. Recent public opinion surveys consistently showed that around 70% of Georgian citizens support the EU integration, suggesting a significant gap between the party's claims and measured public statement. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for joining us.